everyone, this is Lomi, and today I'm sewing some new pants for Vahn, who is an Iplehouse SID Claude and represents one of the characters from my book series, The Snake's Blood Saga. I've been working on his outfit a little bit at a time, and I put off making his pants for a long time because, honestly, I was intimidated by using a new material. I kind of laughed about it afterward because this isn't the first time I've run into that, but I'll share my thoughts as we go along. I'm using real leather for this, and it was my first time sewing real leather, so I learned some new stuff as I went. The first time I designed this pattern, it was far more complicated, and over the course of many revisions, I ultimately reduced it to just 4 pieces. This gave the best fit and the best results with my test materials, so once I was sure about it, I cut out my leather and got started. I only had enough for 1 pair, so I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. I start by putting the 2 back pieces together with the right sides together, and sew the center seam together, backstitching at either end to keep the stitches from pulling apart. I gave myself a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and in order to help the leather glide under the presser foot, I covered the foot with washi tape. It doesn't stick to the leather like the metal does, and it also worked better than my Teflon feet. Next, I put the 2 front pieces together and sew just the bottom inch of the front curve, again backstitching at the beginning and end. This holds the pieces together but gives me a wide front opening, which helps a lot in dressing this doll, who has a very tapered waist. Because leather is a material that can stretch, I don't finish the front opening right away, and will instead finish it based on how the pants fit after they're mostly sewn. So the next step is putting the front and back together with the right sides together and sewing the side seams closed. As always, backstitch at the beginning and end of the seam. I repeat this to close both sides. When sewing with leather, it needs a few special considerations. First off, I did use a leather needle, which has a broad head with a very sharp end that's designed to cut through the material. This can leave visible holes, which you can help reduce by using a heavy-duty thread, but I found my sewing machine couldn't handle it, so I just used regular thread and had big punctures left along the seam. I found the holes shrank if the leather was dampened and left to dry after sewing, but if you do that, you have to be careful to ensure it doesn't leave water spots or cause your sewn pieces to warp out of shape. It also helps to increase your stitch length a bit, because then the holes will be farther apart, and that also lets the leather retain more of its natural strength, so stretching or tearing along seams will be less likely. Another thing to consider is that you shouldn't use cotton or cotton blend threads when sewing with leather. The natural acids found in leather can cause plant-based fibers to deteriorate over time, which means cotton thread used in leather will eventually break. To ensure my doll's pants last as long as possible, I used a standard weight polyester thread. After the sides are closed, I trim the seam allowances down to about 1/8 of an inch. One nice thing about leather is that every piece can be reused for accents on future doll outfits, including these tiny strips that can become lacing for boots or trim for future designs. There's very little waste, which is good because it can be a very expensive material to work with. Before the inseam is closed, I finish the bottom edge of each pant leg by folding the bottom edge in about 1/4 of an inch and sewing it down. This isn't necessary because leather won't shred or fray, but I find it gives a nicer finish. You'll notice I sew this with a piece of tearaway stabilizer underneath. This is to prevent the feed dogs on the machine from leaving marks on the surface of the leather. This isn't a concern for interior seams, but I don't want any marks on the outside. Both legs get finished the same way, with a short pause to rethread my machine when the needle came unthreaded. That happens sometimes if you don't leave a long enough tail, which is one of the main reasons I don't usually use my machine's automatic thread cutting function. Once both pant legs are sewn, I fold the inseam shut and sew along it, starting at the cuff of one leg and going up to the crotch and then down to the other cuff. I backstitch at the ends to make sure the seam is strong. Where the leather is thicker at the cuffs, it's harder for my machine to pull the material under the presser foot, So I pull firmly on the tails of the thread to get it started. Once it's going though, it's fine. To keep the leather from folding at the hem of the other cuff, I put a small piece of stabilizer beneath it to hold the hem flat. I was so nervous about making a mistake, and it really made it a stressful project to sew, even after I simplified the pattern. My original design was so much worse, with pockets and belt loops and a waistband. Ultimately, I decided to scrap those because why make it harder for myself when these pants were going to be hidden by his gambeson and chainmail and tabard? He wouldn't even be able to reach pockets, so it made no sense to include them. I can't imagine how stressed I would have been about working with a new material I had in limited supply if I had tried to make something so needlessly complicated. Like with the outer seams, I trim the inseam and save the strip of leather I cut off to use on some other outfit. If I don't use it on Vahn's outfit, I have plenty of other dolls who would benefit. Then I turn the pants right side out. The front opening of the pants is designed to be folded to the inside at an angle, so the edges lay flush in the front of the pants, giving a tidy closure. I tried the pants on my doll to see how far they needed to fold back. I marked it with a water-soluble pencil and then sew the flaps in place, using stabilizer to keep the surface of the leather nice. I backstitch at the bottom, but I don't need to at the top, since it will be folded in by about 1/4 inch for the top edge to be finished. This too gets sewn with stabilizer underneath. I backstitch at the beginning and end of the hem here, but this is the last step of sewing. My machine had some difficulty right in the middle where the center back seam was, so I removed the loose thread and went over that section of the seam another time. At this point, the pants are ready to finish with eyelets along the front. I use a watercolor pencil to mark where I want the eyelets to go. Overall, it really wasn't bad to sew, and I was relieved when it was done, but also felt like I'd kind of gotten myself worked up over nothing. It's always hard to trust my own abilities whenever I do something new, especially when using materials that aren't easy to replace. I suppose more than anything, it's a reminder that I need to do a better job of trusting myself, my experience as a sewist, and all the practice I've had making doll clothes. New materials can be scary, but it's also important to stretch yourself creatively and try new challenges. Once I'm happy with the placement for the eyelet locations, I use a leather punch to make holes and my eyelet setter to insert them. The leather was thick enough that I had a bit of a hard time getting the eyelets to go through in some places, but I just chose to remain patient and take the time I needed to get every eyelet just right before I crimp it. People are always interested in my eyelet tool, and it's a We Are Memory Keepers Crop-A-Dial from the scrapbooking section of the craft store. I keep a full list of the tools I use for sewing, crafting, doll modifications, and face-ups on my website, and you can find a link to that list in the video description. Now the pants are done and they're ready to wear and lace up. I opted for a ribbon this time rather than using the leather laces I just cut, because I already have a use in mind for those and would rather use them where they'll be seen. Overall, I'm happy with the fit. These are simple and easy to make, and they work in a wide variety of materials. But now it's time to move on to the next part of his outfit. If you enjoyed this, let me know what you think, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next step of this doll's customization. That's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.